It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
All right. We've got a question from Tyler on YouTube. He says, I am 27 and looking to go back to graduate school for an MBA. I know the money guy policy for student loans for a bachelor degree, but what is your stance for a master's degree?
Yeah.
He says he is currently debt free, so that's awesome. But that's a really good question because we talk a lot about undergrad, but what about some of these graduate
Did he say he's
degrees?
going back to school or did he just graduate?
He said he's going back to school.
Going back to
And he's
school.
27.
So I'm going to
yeah.
make the assumption that you've been out in the workforce for a while and you are thinking about going back to school. Now, here's my opinion, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but if you're someone who was out in the working world and you made the choice to go back into education, to increase your education, I think that's awesome. I also think that that's a goal that should be saved for. So I don't love, for folks that are going back to school, I don't love you accumulating student debt for that. Because I think if you have that desire, you should find, it's possible to find ways to be able to pay for those costs either while you are working or to save up so that when you do leave the workforce, you have money to pay for that so you're not incurring debt. But maybe debt is just something you can't get away from. You have to, or maybe you're not 27. Maybe you're someone who just finished undergrad and you're going into grad school. I would argue that the amount of debt, the rules of thumb is very, very similar. You look at how much do I think I'll be making in my first year, my first few years. I probably should not accumulate more debt than what that will be, right? So if I'm only going to be able to make $60,000 in debt my first year after grad school, perhaps I don't need to go run up $160,000 of education debt. That just isn't a great
That's
trade-off.
a pretty huge burden.
And then another thing that I would just throw out there is if you're someone who's trying to figure out, do I go back and get my master's? Do I go back and get an advanced degree? I'd look at your pay differential. If I could make this much with just an undergraduate degree and I could make this much with a graduate degree, I probably shouldn't accumulate more debt. Then that margin would allow me to pay off pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
Or then it's not an incredibly, it's not a super helpful ROI. But I would encourage you, if you are thinking about going back to school, I'd love to see you save for it and be able to cover that out of the savings that you have or potentially out of cash flow if you're someone who's going to work while going back to school.
Right. And if you think about the financial order of operations, we do have a step on there that's prepaid future expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can get to the point where you are saving for the future, you are checking a lot of the early steps in the financial order of operations, like this advice that you're giving falls right in line with that.
absolutely.
So if you're, if you look at the FU a lot, that falls on, I think it's step 8.
Prepaid
actually.
future
So it is
expenses,
kind of
step 8.
far
Yep.
down the path.